We're delighted to welcome Linda McIntyre and Rachel Flesher today. And before they answer all the questions that you've been sending in, they will be talking to us about the renewed education inspection framework. A little bit about our speakers before we kick off. Linda is a specialist advisor working in education improvement and the governance team. She began her career as an NNEB and she worked in both the UK and South Africa, running preschools, nurseries and out-of-school provision before graduating from the Open University and moving into inspection. Apologies. She has since worked as an Ofsted inspector. She's been a regulatory inspector, a national trainer, a senior officer and a lead professional as well. She's also a mental health first aid England instructor committed to supporting mental health and wellbeing across the workforce. Rachel is a highly experienced Ofsted inspector and quality lead practice in the school and education policy team, and she leads on the development and implementation of inspection practice guidance to support a culture of continuous improvement and learning. She holds an early years professional status and a BA honours in early childhood studies, and also beginning as an NNEB, Rachel has worked in a range of childcare settings in various roles, and she was an early years advisor with local authority for many years, before joining Ofsted as an inspector of early years providers and children's centres. So over to you, Linda and Rachel.
Good morning, my name's Rachel. I'm one of His Majesty's Inspectors and a Quality and Practice Lead in the Early Education Policy team here at Ofsted. I'm pleased to present to you as well my colleague Linda. Linda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody, it's lovely to be here. I'm Linda McIntyre. I am Quality and Practice Lead, currently working in the early years regulatory space, focusing on regulatory practice.
Thank you. And we're joining you today to answer your questions. So thank you so much for taking the time to submit these in advance. But before we move on to your questions, we just wanted to share a few slides with you about our renewed education inspection framework and where you can find more information should you want to do so. And just a note, when we talk about leaders and educators, we of course include childminders in this because childminders are the leaders and educators of their early years settings. Okay, so before we start, I just want to take a moment to recognise the really important work that you all do for our youngest children day in, day out. So we're starting here with a quote from our Chief Inspector, Sir Martin, which highlights the importance of the early years. We recognise the incredibly difficult job that you do to support, to care for and educate our youngest children. So thank you for your continuing hard work, dedication and professionalism.
Thanks. So we're going to focus now on what's changed for you as registered early years settings in light of the updates. We're focusing on inspectors and on what do they do differently. Inspectors now consider data in understanding your setting's context. This is published data. It's for inspectors to really understand the context of the local communities in which you work. So they'll look at the local area information. This would include deprivation data, the take-up of EYPP, obesity levels and oral health data. And you also have access to this data available to you. The other change is that inspectors will make the notification call before 10 a.m. We recognise that calling at lunchtime is one of the busiest times for you, so we now call earlier in the morning to notify you of the inspection. Inspectors also use an email for sharing and receiving information before the inspection. So this email is sent to leaders signposting them to the useful information about the inspection process, as well as asking them to prepare the data that's needed. And this is about children and staff at the setting, so the numbers of children on roll, the numbers of children in receipt of EYPP, qualifications of staff, etc. There will then be a planning call with you ahead of the inspection for inspectors to understand the unique context of your setting, your setting's curriculum overview, and what you see as the strengths and priorities for improvement. We no longer complete a learning walk with leaders as the information is gathered now in that planning call. Undertaking shared observations is something that is now done, and increased and ongoing professional dialogue with leaders throughout the inspection. This is something that was working in childminder inspections, working really well. So childminders were already doing this with inspectors during inspection, and having that ongoing professional dialogue, we now take this in approach across all the setting types. We now inform childminders of the day they will be inspecting. Childminders will be inspected within 5 working days of the notification call, and inspectors will agree with them which day is best to inspect, taking into account the children who will be attending. We no longer grade out of school providers as met or not met. Instead, for all the evaluation areas except safeguarding, the grades are used, and we will go into a little bit more detail in the questions and answers later on that. I'm now going to take us through an overview of the inspection process. So the diagram on screen now shows an overview of the inspection process from start to finish, and the purple boxes, you can see the on-site activities. I also just want to take a moment to highlight the difference between the notification call and the planning call. So the notification call is just a short call made before 10 a.m. to advise you that it will take place. The inspector will agree with you when the best time will be to have the planning call, which is more in depth, and it's a discussion held later but on the same day between the lead inspector, if there's more than one inspector, and the settings leader. Other staff may also join the call at the leader's request. For group providers, inspectors must call the setting before 10 a.m. on the working day before the inspection. This is the notification call. And as with before, for childminders and group settings that do not operate regularly, such as summer play schemes, etc., inspectors must call the setting no more than 5 working days before the inspection to check which days they are operating and whether there are any early years children on roll or present. For childminders, inspectors will discuss with you and identify the most suitable day for the inspection to take place, so you'll know when to expect your inspection. Inspectors will call you for the planning call at the time that was agreed with you in the notification call. The call will not be recorded, but you are welcome to take notes.
Thank you, Linda. So I'll move on now to explain a little more about how the toolkit works for early years. So our early years toolkit shows leaders and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on, and within them the standards we evaluate and use to grade settings. Inspectors will apply the toolkit, evaluation areas, themes and standards, tailoring evaluations to each setting's context. Nothing in the standards set out in the toolkit should add to a setting's workload. That's not our intention at all. Our toolkits are built on the requirements, standards and expectations already placed on leaders and their settings. In early years, of course, this is the early years foundation stage. And inspectors can help providers focus on delivering these requirements more efficiently and effectively. So on this slide, you can see the evaluation areas for early years. These are specifically designed to align with the statutory early years foundation stage framework. So these are safeguarding, inclusion, curriculum and teaching, achievement, behaviour attitudes and establishing routines, children's welfare and well-being, and leadership and governance. Safeguarding standards are graded as met or not met in early years, as in schools and other remits. Just to note that when there are no early years children present or on roll at the time of the inspection, inspectors only evaluate the grade leadership and governance, because there's no reliable evidence on which to assess the impact on children of the other evaluation areas. So inspectors will use the evaluation area to determine the provider's ongoing suitability to meet the requirements of the EYFS and the Childcare Register if applicable, and grade against the expected standard, needs attention and urgent improvement grades only. And also to note, the learning and development requirements of the EYFS don't apply to before and after school settings and holiday provision. This includes childminders who only provide care before and after school or during the school holidays, and for children who normally attend reception or older classes during the school day. Therefore, the curriculum and teaching and achievement evaluation areas are not evaluated or graded for our out-of-school settings.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm now going to focus on two sections which can be found in each evaluation area. Considering the evaluation area for different ages and setting types, and gathering evidence about the evaluation areas. We've been clear that our renewed framework will ensure consistency of inspection practice, and we've also made sure that the toolkit is reflective of each remit and the different setting types within it. In our early years toolkit, we've included an explanation of how it should be applied within the different setting types. For example, in achievement, you can see here on the slide, inspectors will consider what practice looks like in a childminder or for the different ages of children. This shows that the standards are not generic statements but are carefully tailored to reflect the different ages of children as well as the setting type. Where relevant, this section sets out the areas that apply to out-of-school settings as well as when we inspect them and when there are no children on roll or present. In short, the toolkit seeks to make it clear how we will apply each evaluation area in each setting, like yours, what you can expect inspectors to be looking at in practice. So once we've set out what an evaluation area covers, the toolkit then moves on into detail about the kind of evidence inspectors will gather. As you can see on the slide, each evaluation area considers themes and then gives prompts that guides inspectors' observations and their conversations. Each evaluation area always starts with a theme about strategic leadership of that area and ends with a theme about inclusive practice in that area. These prompts are not checklists for settings. They're there to help inspectors, to guide them to think about what to explore and to discuss in gathering evidence in context, and to make sure the evaluation area is consistent and fair. For example, in curriculum and teaching, inspectors might consider how well the curriculum is sequenced or how practitioners adapt their approach for children with different starting points. In leadership, prompts might focus on how leaders support professional development and ensure that the curriculum is well taught. So the key takeaway from this slide is that the toolkit makes inspection more transparent. You can see the themes that inspectors will explore through our observations and discussions that will help shape that evidence gathering.
Thank you, Linda. And from April 2026, the Department for Education, the DfE, are funding Ofsted to inspect earlier settings more frequently. So all settings registered with Ofsted on the early years register will be inspected at least once by March 2030. If you've already been inspected under the previous 6-year window, you will move to the new 4-year window as your next routine inspection. And of course, where we have concerns about a setting, we can and will of course visit more frequently. Newly registered settings will usually have their first inspection within 18 months of their registration date. And this is a change from the previous 6-year inspection window and 30-month window for newly registered settings. We have a shared commitment with the DfE to give parents a more up-to-date information and reassurance about the quality of their children's early education and care, and the department is funding this change for Ofsted to inspect early year settings more frequently.
Thanks, Rachel. So we know this has been a brief overview of our renewed inspection framework, as we wanted to spend most of our time answering the really good questions that you've submitted. But before we do that, we're just going to share with you some helpful resources that provide more detail, which you can share with your staff and your teams because it's available to you. The early years inspection toolkit. So this is about what inspectors and early years providers use to discuss the quality of provision on inspection. Then we've got the early years inspection operating guide. This is a step-by-step guide for inspectors on how to inspect registered early years settings. And then finally, we've got the information about early years inspections. And this is for staff and leaders, parents and carers, and for the wider public. They're all consistent with each other, but they've all present a different lens to look through. So this link now on the screen will take you directly to the playlists where you can find a recording of the webinars which are most relevant for you. If you have any questions or missed when you might be inspected, all of that is covered in our frequently asked questions blog. You can scan the link on the screen to access it and other blogs from the Ofsted on early years. And the new Ofsted report cards and grades, a guide for parents video is available via on screen here. To bookmark this video, scan the QR code and then click on the bookmark icon.
And that's a really helpful video, isn't it, Linda, for providers as well? That's something that I have often mentioned to providers to have a listen to and a watch, because it is really helpful. So I do recommend that to providers and to your teams. So it's a really helpful short video, isn't it? So thank you.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so now we'll move on to our questions and answers. And thank you, Lucy, for sharing screens. We can stop sharing screens now and we'll go into the Q&A.
Amazing. So without further ado, so we've got it broken down into different sections as the questions were asked. The first one is around the renewed inspection framework. So what will Ofsted ask in the planning call is the first question.
Okay, thank you. So I covered this briefly a moment ago, but in a bit more detail. Following the notification call, you'll receive an email asking you to prepare key data that you will be asked for during the planning call. So this includes the age range and number of children on roll, the number of 5-year-olds on roll, operating times, number of staff and their levels of qualifications, the number and age of children receiving additional funding, including the early years pupil premium and disability access funding, and the number of children with SEND. Providers have also told us that this is a really welcome step in the renewed framework methodology, because it allows inspectors and leaders to establish a really positive working relationship from the outset. During the planning call, the inspector will want to discuss practicalities, the setting's context, what you want children to know and what you want them to be able to do. When discussing the setting's unique context, inspectors will explore your successes and your leadership priorities and your approach to inclusion. You'd also have the opportunity to share any important context that you'd like the inspector to know specifically about your setting. And please don't worry about forgetting something. It really is not a memory test. You'll be able to share more about your context during the inspection itself.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Linda. What paperwork do you need to see during this inspection?
So inspectors will ask to see either online or in printed form information that relates to the disclosure and barring records, DBS, any other documents summarising the checks on and the vetting and employment arrangements for all staff working at the setting. Inspectors don't need to see the DBS checks for those providing childcare on domestic premises, childminders, including childminders without domestic premises, or any other known assistants or household members. This is because they've already been checked as part of the registration process. Inspectors may wish to view other documentation required by the EYFS. However, the majority of evidence is gathered through discussion and through observation.
Brilliant. Okay. Is the new framework actually better, and how has training for inspectors changed?
Well, we're finding that our renewed inspection framework is more collaborative and that it's fairer. We are, of course, committed to working with you from the outset, starting with the planning call, as we said earlier, where we determine the areas of inspection focus with you during that call, and we'll agree the most appropriate inspection activities tailored to the context of your setting and children. So that's why it's important that you do tell us, set your scene and tell us about that context of your setting and your children right from the outset. And parents have told us that they want better and more detailed information about their child's preschool, nursery, childminder or out of school club, highlighting the setting's strengths and areas for improvement. And we believe that the format of the report card does that well. We also need to be fair to settings, so it's important to point out where settings don't meet the expected standards, and important, of course, to celebrate exceptionality. On all inspections, we celebrate strengths, we validate leaders' priorities and progress, and of course we highlight where improvement is still needed. And our inspectors have had extensive training in the renewed framework, and they've undergone quality assurance processes before they've been determined as confident and competent to carry out our inspections under this framework.
Brilliant, thank you. Does an inspector's mood on the day affect the overall inspection? How do you ensure this consistency throughout Ofsted?
So in terms of an inspector's mood affecting the overall inspection, no, not at all. And in terms of consistency, every inspection will be unique because, as we've been saying, every setting is unique and we adapt to each setting's context. However, we will be consistent in our approach to inspection and how we grade each setting. Our inspections are based on the statutory requirements of the EYFS, as we've already said, and our toolkits make it clear what inspectors will expect to see and how they evaluate the extent to which these things are happening. Inspectors have had, like I said, extensive training, professional development and support to prepare them well for inspecting to the renewed framework consistently, and this training and support for inspectors continues. And all our reports go through quality assurance to begin with, so that we are assured that inspectors are grading settings fairly and proportionately. And if any leader experiences something other than what we have communicated you should be expecting, then please raise these with the inspector in the first instance. We ask right at the start of the notification call and the planning call about that open communication and those lines of communication between leaders and the inspector. But so raise anything first of all with the inspector to give them the opportunity to put matters right or to help explain something if something wasn't understood. But if after that concerns continue, then you have the option of calling the provider contact helpline, where you'll be able to speak to a senior manager, and the inspector will give you that number during the notification or planning call. So make sure you've noted that down. And finally, you also are able to submit a complaint again about Ofsted using our process up to the point that your report is published.
Right, thank you. You kind of touched on this earlier, but what are you looking for in out-of-school clubs based within a school?
Yeah, I touched on that earlier. Our toolkit really lays out and explains what we're looking for in an out-of-school club on the early years register. This includes those who are based in a school, but I'll sort of summarise the biggest change that's occurred. The outcome is no longer met or not met, which it was previously. Instead, we grade safeguarding, inclusion, behaviour and attitudes, and establishing routines, children's welfare and well-being, and leadership and governance only. So what that means is we do not grade curriculum and teaching or achievement. The graded areas that we do grade are on the same 5-point scale, except for safeguarding, which, like in all inspections, is met or not met. For out-of-school settings who are only on the childcare register, we do compliance inspections. So we don't evaluate and grade the quality of the provision, but we check to make sure that the provider is complying with the requirements of their registration, so the childcare register requirements. And there's no published report for these inspections. Instead, we send the provider an inspection outcome letter confirming whether or not they are complying with the requirements.
Okay, I'm going to skip a couple because I think you definitely have covered this, unless you want me to ask every question. I can just quickly ask, but you have answered this already. How much notice will we get of an inspection under the new renewed framework? I think you've mentioned that, but yeah, if you want to cover that again.
Yeah, I think the only thing we would add in there is about the group provision, which operates regularly, will call by 10 a.m. the working day before. I'm not sure if we particularly said that about the timing. That's to make the notification call, and like Linda said earlier, then we would arrange when to have that longer call at a convenient time for both the inspector and the setting. And it's important to say that we may still inspect, like we've said, about without notice when our risk assessment deems it appropriate. So there might be times where we come out and you don't get that announced, that notification of the inspection, and we have a clear criteria of why we make that when we make that decision. But everything we would do in the notification call in that instance, we would do when we arrive at that initial meeting with you. So we will go through all the same things that we would do on the planning call with you when we arrive, rather than in a planning call.
Brilliant, thank you. Will there be an opportunity to show inspectors things that's not potentially captured in the toolkit?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
The question is, will there be an opportunity to, or be opportunities to show inspectors things that's not captured in the toolkit?
Have you got an example of what you mean by that?
No, maybe if carry on, Gail.
I was just going to say, I think maybe this one was obviously with the new inspection toolkit being released. If that's not if it's not mentioned in the inspection toolkit at all, can they still show and demonstrate other areas that they feel that are particularly strong?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that comes under the context of the setting, doesn't it, really? If it's relevant to the context of the setting, then absolutely yes.
Brilliant. Okay. And last one on this section, if a setting gets a strong standard in an evaluation area, how long before the next inspection? I think you mentioned that as well. So now it goes into the cycle for 4 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes, yeah. If it's irrelevant of what the outcome of the gradings are, you will be usually inspected again within that 4 years. We may visit sooner, of course, if we've got any concerns about the care that you provide.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next section, which is early years toolkit that we've just been speaking about. So what do inspectors look for in exceptional in early years?
Exceptional, or were we talking about strong?
Probably possibly the new strong.
The strong
word.
Yeah, I mean that we can talk a little bit about exceptional, but if we focus on the question in relation to strong initially. So when inspectors do go into a setting, they start by checking whether the provision is meeting the requirements for the expected standard. So the expected standard is a really high bar. What the expected standard means is that the provision is meeting all of the needs of the children and complying and doing the right thing for children and complying with all the requirements. So we need to just remember that expected under this framework is a high bar. But when identifying the practices particularly strong, we find that leaders really know their strengths and their areas for improvement extremely well. And they've instilled that culture of continuous improvement where professional development is of a consistently high quality. And that word, consistently high quality, and it's precisely thinking about that precision is precisely matched to the improvement priorities. Leaders have high expectations of themselves, of their team, and high expectations of what children can achieve, and they're doing all they can for that. Thinking about the curriculum, high quality curriculum and teaching is consistently embedded, and leaders and practitioners are making a demonstrable difference to all children, and particularly the most disadvantaged children and those with SEND. A setting that has high expectations for all, where any barriers to or gaps in children's learning or well-being are swiftly identified. So focusing on that word swiftly identified and then promptly addressed through highly effective action. So you can sort of hear those words that are really strong, that swiftly identified and promptly addressed. And that those actions will be making a sustained difference to children's opportunities and experiences, so that all children, regardless of their needs and backgrounds, will be really well prepared to move on through the different stages of their education, including school. The strong standards in the toolkit explain this high bar in further detail.
Great. Thanks very much, Linda. The one after this, you've pretty much covered what do inspectors tend to notice in settings where practice is particularly strong, and I think you've made that really clear. Next question is sustainability part of Ofsted? And I think that means is part of
if we could, I think, because Linda's just nicely covered about strong, what we would like to cover there is the question, what do inspectors look for in exceptional in early years? So if I could just cover that question as well.
Of course.
So it's important. It's important just before we move on, because it's important that we do talk about the difference between strong and exceptional. So obviously Linda's described strong as being that really high bar already. So when our toolkit explains what exceptional may look like, this grade is for settings where the evidence shows that standards are not only strong but truly transformational, and that means everything in the strong standard is already being met securely and consistently, and that leaders are making a sustained difference for children and should share their practice beyond their own setting. So the key words in there are about it being transformational and that sustained difference. And as we've said, exceptional will be rare. And when we're considering this grade, inspectors will consider if the setting specific practice could support system-wide improvement, because exceptional means practice that is so unique that it should be showcased. Exceptional means that it's among the very best nationally. And it's also worth saying that we've heard there is a misconception, we've heard some of it from our childminders, that there's a misconception that childminders can't get exceptional, and that's absolutely not true. All types of settings can be graded exceptional, and this includes childminders, co-childminders, out of school settings, and all of the setting types that are registered on the early years register. The exception to this is that where there are no early years children on roll or present on the day of the inspection, then expected standard, as we've said, is the highest grade possible. And just reminding you that our reports go through our rigorous quality assurance process, where we ensure that any exceptional grades at all awarded are proportionate, equitable, and reflect that exceptional quality of education and care given to children. And I'll let Linda answer your question now about the sustainability part of Ofsted.
Do you want to ask it again, just for so everybody's clear what the question was? Yeah.
The question is sustainability part of Ofsted? So yes.
Yeah, thank you. So the answer is no, because our inspection and regulation activities are carried out against the requirements of the EYFS and in some cases the Childcare Register. And the EYFS doesn't include any requirements for providers to develop or show climate action plans. So inspectors would not expect to see any of these documents or consider them as part of their evaluations or inspection outcomes. However, this could be a good example to the question that you presented earlier about whether something's not in the toolkit. This isn't in the toolkit, obviously, but this could be something that a setting is working on and chose to share and is very relevant to the context of their curriculum, for example. So it's not that inspectors wouldn't, but it's not something that they would grade against, but it could be something they capture in terms of the uniqueness of the setting.
Perfect, thank you. So talking about the gradings, the changing gradings, how effective do you feel the changes to the grading system has has been, so good, inadequate, expected, standard, needs attention, etc. How have inspections been going since the new changes in the grading?
So in early years, the picture from the pilots, because obviously we carried out pilot inspections before we started inspecting for real, and our early inspections, over 3,000, is a positive one. So leaders tell us that the renewed approach felt clear, collaborative, and grounded in what matters most for children. And because of the introduction of the planning call, inspectors are able to spend more time observing children directly and case sampling children, which gives that rich insight into children's experiences and development. What's coming through really clear is how much leaders value that professional dialogue. That's really considerable feedback that we've had from nearly all of our inspections, that they feel able to talk openly about their work rather than feeling that they need to perform or comply. So when we were saying earlier about entering into that professional dialogue right from the planning call, that's so important that you develop that relationship with the inspector where you're talking about your setting, explaining what you do and why, and your children at your setting, so that we can have those professional dialogues and that you can talk openly and freely and feel confident to really set your stall out. Settings also tell us that the new approach feels proportionate and sensitive to the wide range of early years settings, including very small settings, for example. And overall, the early years early findings show that the approach works well on the ground, provides that really keen focus on children, which of course should be, they're at the heart of everything we do, and gives inspectors and leaders the space to have meaningful, constructive conversations. And having completed inspections myself recently, that's absolute, and observed inspections and quality assured inspections, I've seen, and I know you have as well, Linda, the power of those constructive conversations throughout the inspection.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Let's move on to leadership and governance. So a question we've had is, the role of the nominee feels unclear. How is it different to the manager?
Okay, good question. So most early years settings won't need a nominee, and they definitely won't be disadvantaged from not having one if they choose not to. Some larger early years settings may benefit from having a nominee. The nominee needs to be someone who knows the day-to-day running of the setting really well. And we explain a lot more about the role of the nominee in our inspection guidance. The nominee, though, just to be clear here, it's not the same as the nominated individual. So that doesn't mean that any nominated individuals have to act up as the nominee for registered early years settings. They're two different things. But yeah, most early years settings don't need or have or choose to have a nominee at the inspection.
And that has been quite rare, hasn't it, Linda?
It has, yeah.
I think, like you said, the occasions where a setting has chosen is when it's been an exceptionally large provision where there's area managers involved and lots of other managers involved, where it's made sense to have a nominee to help organise the inspection being so large, particularly if there's another inspector, which there's likely to be, isn't there, if it's a really large setting. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. When leaders say they know their provision well, what evidence demonstrates this to you guys?
Yeah, so we like I've said, we want to see that you know the children in your setting. I always start an inspection with a notification call and then the planning call. We're saying to the leaders, you know your setting, you know your children. I don't. Tell me all about it. So when leaders know their setting, they will then be able to explain to us why they've made the decisions that they make, rather than just what decisions they've made. So because they know their children, they've got a clear rationale for the decisions that they make to their curriculum, to any adaptations they make, or any decisions to staffing, because they've made those decisions based on what they know about the children that attend their setting and the context of that setting. And they're thinking about those next steps and what impact they would like to see on those children. And we want to see that you are aware of and reflecting on your setting strengths and your priorities for improving the setting. We want to see how you are delivering your expectations more efficiently and effectively. Remember, don't worry, we've said before, it's not a memory test. You'll be able to share more and more information as we go through the inspection, through those back and forth reflective discussions. But it's really important that you can articulate to us throughout the inspection all about the children and why you do what you do. And then we can see the impact of that while we're there.
Right, thank you. How can leaders demonstrate impact without overwhelming inspectors with just lots and lots of paperwork?
Good question. And the answer is quite similar to some of the themes that Rachel's just shared. Inspectors do this through observations and discussions. Leaders can demonstrate impact by talking with inspectors during shared observations and reflective discussions, talking about the difference that they've made, talking about the children and how they were when they came in and how they are now and what's made a difference during that time, or about practitioners and the progress that they've made in their professional development. Leaders can also explain impact by talking about the children, particularly those that the inspectors case sampling. Inspectors will be interested in what you find out and what you know about those children and why that intervention. What was the outcome of the intervention? Why did you choose the interventions you chose? And what you want next for the child. Talking with parents as well, inspectors do that, especially when they can, about the children that they are case sampling. It's also really helpful, as they can often describe the impact that the setting has had on their child. And this can also be a phone call during the inspection or an email from a parent if it's more convenient, because we do appreciate that it's not always possible in the routine of the setting for the inspector to spend a lot of time talking to parents or for parents to have the time. And obviously they'll talk to practitioners and to staff about the children and want to just genuinely want to, and like Rachel said earlier, they know those children really, really well. And so we just want to get underneath what they know about the children.
Right. Rachel mentioned earlier about the new approach is much more collaborative. And as we know, people really care in the sector, so the nerves are there. So the next question is, what advice would you give staff to feel more confident when they can speak to inspectors?
Yeah, as Rachel said earlier, it's not a memory test. We know that talking to inspectors can feel stressful for some practitioners. And when you're talking about the context of your setting and what you share with inspectors, you can share that it could be the first inspection for some practitioners or for some leaders. We'd encourage you to empower your team to take their time, to take the time that they need, and they can come back to us later if they think about something else that they'd like to share. Always put the children first. So if they are busy with the children, inspectors will be really, really respectful of that. We want to know about the children that staff work with and what their typical experiences are of working at the setting as well. What do they typically experience from working at the setting? Our inspectors will really do their best to put everyone at ease. As part of the planning call, they'll set the scene and they'll also ask about staff and how they might be feeling, if any of them are particularly anxious. And they will talk, as you can see in our guides, about any reasonable adjustments that they need to make. But throughout, they will be empathetic and be as sensitive as they can be. I'd really encourage leaders to support their team to keep their discussions child-focused. When they're able to talk about the children sincerely and confidently, it really shows what they know. And remember, we all want the same thing. Children are at the heart of what we both do as professionals. And if you can remind your teams of that, it will really help them because inspectors, leaders and practitioners all want the best for children. So if they can keep children at the heart of discussions, it helps them to build their confidence as well, because they're really talking about the difference they make day in and day out.
Amazing. Last question on the leadership and governance. Can a level 2 be the boss of a level 6?
So this could be the case where the registered professionals line manager is a setting manager and leaders must ensure that the setting meets the qualifications requirements, of course. So they have to have the meeting the qualification requirements, but they'll have that rationale for how they choose to put people in whichever positions. But leaders also need to consider the training, support and skills requirements of the EYFS. So it's just making sure that you're really covering those EYFS requirements when you're making decisions about who you're putting in which positions with qualifications.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Next section is curriculum, pedagogy and assessment. So first question is, what does an effective curriculum look like and how can settings show this in practice? Through routines, play and activities, including how adults support and extend child-led play during an inspection. Sorry.
It's a long question. So in terms of the curriculum, inspectors will work with you to consider how you design your curriculum to prepare children for their next stage in education. So this goes back to that planning call where we ask about your curriculum and your context of your children and tell us what your curriculum is and why, because you will have designed your curriculum around the children that access your setting so that it's preparing your children that come to your setting, because they're unique children, for their next stage in education. So we consider the experiences of disadvantaged children and those with special educational needs and or disabilities, SEND. And through our professional discussions, we are seeking to understand about the curriculum in more detail. So that might include asking about, for example, what you want children to know and be able to do when they leave your setting, and how you plan children's learning to help them achieve the next steps in their development. And Ofsted doesn't prefer any pedagogy. We just want to see that the curriculum meets all the relevant requirements of the EYFS. So it's about you telling us why you have designed your curriculum the way you have, what's the intent of that, and what are your plans for the children in terms of what you want them to achieve.
Great, thank you. So what counts as a meaningful and accurate assessment, and how can inspectors see this in action without creating unnecessary paperwork or staff workload?
Good question. So this is something that's changed quite a lot over time, certainly from when I used to conduct inspections. We no longer ask to see curriculum planning or assessment data. It's for you to decide how you continually monitor and assess children's learning to help them to make the best possible progress. So during the planning call, inspectors will want to understand what leaders want all the children to know and achieve as part of their setting's curriculum ambition, and how the daily routines and the curriculum are organised to meet the needs of all the children. Leaders can explain their curriculum and how it meets the learning and development requirements of the EYFS in the planning call, and continue to do so throughout the inspection activities, such as the shared observations that are undertaken. We'll gather evidence through discussions with staff and leaders and parents, as well as through shared observations. And during our observations, we gain a shared understanding with leaders about the curriculum in action. So to help us understand the curriculum further, we may ask some questions such as, why this activity? Why now? For whom? Etc. Those are just to help us to really understand what that curriculum looks like in action and to understand how typical it is in terms of the children's everyday experiences.
Great, thank you. Now over to the big I, inclusion, that you guys cover. What does inclusion look like within the new inspection framework? I know you covered a little bit of that previously, but did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think so. Inclusion's now at the heart of our framework. That's why we've got a separate inclusion evaluation area. But it's also why it's an important theme across all the other evaluation areas too, because it isn't just an add-on it's at the very heart of ensuring that every baby and every child does get access to the best start in life. Our Chief Inspector has publicly stated this many times. If we get it right for these children, we get it right for everyone. So as part of the evaluation area, our inspections will look at how a setting is addressing barriers to learning for all children. We'll always start with those the government asks settings to focus on, whether that's through their statutory obligations or non-statutory guidance. That is why we're particularly emphasising those from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds, those with SEND, and those who are known or were previously known to children's social care. We'll also evaluate how well settings ensure high quality support for all children who may face barriers to their learning or their well-being, working with leaders to understand that context, informed by data and that professional dialogue that we've spoken a lot about today. In early years, when we're evaluating curriculum, we gather evidence that reflects the typical experiences of children, the systems, the processes, leaders put in place for practitioners to work with parents in meeting the children's very differing needs, also whilst we're taking into account the context of the setting.
Right, thank you. How do you evaluate cultural capital in early years, particularly in diverse or high deprivation contexts?
Well, we don't use the term cultural capital in our renewed framework. However, we have a bigger focus on settings context that we've emphasised quite a lot already. So Martin Oliver, our Chief Inspector, has been really clear that context is key. And as a result, understanding the local community that a provider serves really is a central part to the methodology of this renewed inspection framework. And again, that starts with that notification call when we ask you all about the context of your setting and the context of your children. So inspectors will use that planning call to develop an accurate understanding of the settings context, including the demographics of the children who attend and their specific needs. And that'll really help them to reflect on the impact of leaders' actions on all children, but particularly disadvantaged children, those with SEND, those who are known or previously known to children's social care, and those who face barriers to their learning and or well-being. And we've also published our Ofsted Explore an Area tool. So I don't know if people have managed to have a look at that tool, but this site will help parents and carers to make informed decisions for their children on accessing local childcare and schools, as well as helping those working in the education and children's social care sectors to better understand the needs of local areas. And this is a tool that inspectors use when preparing for an inspection, meaning that leaders, settings and parents see the same data our inspectors see. And Linda mentioned earlier, so it's things like looking at obesity rates and dental decay records, etc., and for some indicators of what your area might be like. But of course, you can tell us more about what it's really like in your area and the families that you serve. So the data is one thing, but you can put that into context for us, because actually data might not align to your setting and the children and families that access your setting.
Right, thank you. What helps you feel confident that a setting is genuinely inclusive rather than performative?
This is such a good question. So from our experience, this comes across throughout the inspection. Inclusive practice, it's not something you can put on. It's hard to perform on the day, if you like, because it's ongoing. Inspectors may ask about what actions you've previously taken to create an inclusive environment, say, for example, during a reflective discussion or case sampling. But it is something that is really clear and can't be constructed on a day, if you like. A big part of it is about speaking to parents. We try to speak to the parents of the children who we are case sampling. And when we do talk to parents, I think I'll break down what we specifically try to find out about. And we want to know how well they're kept informed about the settings curriculum, the activities and the routines, the quality of the support for any children who are disadvantaged, have SEND, are known or were previously known to social care, or children who face other barriers to their learning or their well-being. We want to know what children are learning to keep themselves safe and healthy, and how parents are supported to continue that learning at home. We want to know how the setting gathers children's views and considers them in planning curriculum, activities and routines, and to what extent their children are included and engaged in the settings community. Our observations of children and the conversations we hold with practitioners and with leaders and with parents really help us to evaluate a settings inclusive practice.
And if I may just jump in there as well, Linda, in terms of when we're speaking to parents, just a tip from me would be, when you're thinking about making parents available to an inspector or contacting parents to help provide some evidence to inspectors during the inspection, really think about those parents and those children where you can show where you've had impact, because that's where we often get the most powerful evidence from. So where you've perhaps helped a family in a particular circumstance and it's helped the parents and the children, or it might be where you've helped secure an IEP for a child or some additional support. Just think about the power of some of that evidence that we can get from parents when you select parents that can really tell us some really powerful journeys that they've been on with you and your children.
Right, thank you so much.
That would be my tip.
One of the things I was saying, SEND is a big feature for you guys now. So do you have any advice for a newly appointed SENCO and how they can prepare for Ofsted?
Yeah, another good question. I mean, the advice is for the leaders, really, because it's about the support that they give to that SENCO. The main thing would be obviously clearly knowing the EYFS, especially in relation to the roles and responsibilities with regard to the SEND Code of Practice. And as we've said repeatedly, this isn't about a memory test of the SEND Code of Practice. It's about knowing what is the role and responsibility of the SENCO. SENCOs would also find it useful to look at our toolkit possibly, because it explains how we look at inclusion during the inspection and what conversations we may have with SENCOs. And above all, it's about knowing the children, the families, and how their needs are being met through the systems and processes that are in place. And don't be shy to celebrate the impact that you've had on children attending, but most of all, it's about knowing those children and families, being confident in the systems and processes, and just being able to share that sincerely, you know. As we said, as I've just said, it's not about a memory test, it's about the sincerity of what is typically happening at that setting, and the difference it's making for the children.
Right, thank you. And last question under the inclusion section. How does Ofsted consider how settings meet the needs of children known to social care?
So you'll notice that throughout our toolkit, we reference those who are known or previously known to children's social care. And this means that our inspectors consider the needs of children known to social care on every inspection. The safeguard and evaluation area explains that inspectors will gather evidence about how leaders work collaboratively with social workers and other professionals as appropriate to provide effective multi-agency planning and support for children who are known or previously known to children's social care. An inclusive practice which includes children known to social care is a theme in all of our evaluation areas.
Brilliant.
Thank you. On to the next section now, which covers safeguarding. Could you give us the updates on safeguarding, please, the recent updates?
Yeah, I can do that. So on the 18th of March this year, the Minister for Early Education and Minister for Qualities, Olivia Bailey MP, sent a letter to all registered providers informing them of changes to the EYFS planned for September. So I'll cover some of those key points. So updates to wording in the EYFS about safeguarding requirements for safe sleeping arrangements. Requirements around safer sleep will now be set out directly within the framework itself, so will be a lot more specific. Updated requirements for providers of childcare on domestic premises. This includes their requirement to notify Ofsted about persons aged 16 or older living or working on any premises from which the childcare on domestic premises is provided. A link to the updated screen time and online safety guidance for early years settings. The Department for Education is also considering making changes to the EYFS in future to make sure all children are suitably protected from banned dog breeds in childcare settings. This is following a consultation. But we do inspect and regulate in line with the statutory requirements of the EYFS. And what I mean by this is, until the EYFS is updated to include what I've just shared, we won't be considering them as part of our inspection or regulatory practice. So they've got to be, legal requirements before we inspect or regulate against them. So watch this space for when they become legal requirements.
Thank you. When evaluating safeguarding, what paperwork do inspectors want to see?
We've said earlier, haven't we, about that we'll always look at the disclosure and barring service, the DBS records.
Yeah.
And then we would look at any of the documents that summarise the checks on and the vetting and employment arrangements of all staff working with settings. And it may be that we look at other things, the policy and things, if an inspector needed to do that, if that became an area of inspection focus before or during the inspection. But they're the minimum things we would look at.
On to GDPR. How does Ofsted view GDPR compliance? For example, WhatsApp usage, etc.
So settings must, as we've said repeatedly, must meet the EYFS requirements about information and record keeping. The EYFS says confidential information and records about staff and children must be held securely and only accessible and available to those who have a right or professional need to see them. Providers must be aware of their responsibilities under the data protection legislation and, where relevant, the Freedom of Information Act 2000. So how settings comply with this is really up to them. Each setting's so unique. They'll have their own specific approach, but they have to comply with that requirement specifically, and they have to think carefully about how they do that and their justification for the processes that they use to do that.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Just briefly, when it comes to safeguarding, I know obviously it's a huge topic, and how do you ensure that practitioners have the confidence and the consistency in practice, particularly in regards to safeguarding?
So it goes back to the early years toolkit, and that does explain the safeguarding evaluation area and how we consider how the setting establishes that open and positive safeguarding culture. We really are looking at that, how well embedded a safeguarding culture is, and that puts children's interests first, and the extent to which leaders take effective whole setting approach to safeguarding. So that's why we talk to staff and ask those safeguarding questions, as well as asking leaders and as well as talking to parents, because we want to make sure that there is an embedded positive safeguarding culture, that where everybody understands their roles and responsibilities to keep children safe and what they need to do. And like we've said earlier, it's not a memory test. We don't expect them to be able to reel off. They might have forgotten the name of the ladder, or they might have forgotten the number that we would ring, but it's about explaining the action they would take in line with safeguarding policies and procedures to keep children safe. So if you are helping in your staff prepare in terms of confidence inspection, it's about their ability to be able to really talk about their roles and responsibilities in safeguarding and that culture. That's what I would like to add to that.
Thank you.
So the last section is about staff training and supervision. How do you evaluate supervision conversations?
So if we look at the EYFS, that says that providers must put appropriate arrangements in place for the supervision of staff who have contact with children and families. And effective supervision provides support, coaching and training for the practitioner and promotes the interests of the children. So supervision should foster a culture of mutual support, teamwork and continuous improvement, which encourages the confidential discussion of sensitive information. So we consider supervision as part of the safeguarding and leadership and governance evaluation area, and we'll gather evidence through discussions with leaders and practitioners. So again, this is something that we will talk to staff about. We'll ask them about their supervisions, their one-to-ones, their professional development opportunities, how they're kept up to date, how they're kept informed, staff meetings, those sorts of things we would like them to talk to us about, because we'll hear from leaders telling us what leaders do by providing updates, but actually we want to then connect that with finding out what the staff see as part of their training and supervision and the impact of that.
Right, thank you. And the last question is, what roles do apprentices play during the inspection?
So apprentices play a role in the inspection in the same way other practitioners do. We want to know about the support and supervision that they receive and what they know about the children that they work with. And again, this is something that when we're doing that planning call and we're talking about the staff at the setting, because we ask on the notification call for information about the staff and the children on roll that's provided at the planning call stage. There you can explain to us if you have some apprentices, if they're very new, or if you've got some that have been with you a long time, so that we can, that will help the inspector know who to speak to get some really valuable evidence about how you support those apprentices and how they are supported to do their work effectively.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for both of you for answering 1,000,001 questions and again sharing all the tools with us today. So thanks again everybody for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.